Welcome, everyone. This is Glenn McKnight. I'm one of the co-founders of the Virtual School of Internet Governance, along with Alfredo Calderon. We have the great pleasure today to have the new minted VP for North America, Naela Sarres. She'll be speaking on the ICANN role as an actor within the section that we're doing and what its purpose and role is. And also with Marita Moll, who's an ALAC person for Norello, and she's going to talk about multi-stakeholders. Presentation by Naela, if that's okay with you.
Totally.
Okay. So what everybody got was a great presentation from Marita, which is the 50,000-foot perspective. It's contextual because what Nelly is going to be talking about now is actual concrete example of multi-stakeholderism in action. Alfredo, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I just wanted to let the participants know that some of the material that we have in Module 1 on the history of Internet governance, Marita mentioned, and you'll be able to see the whole documents or the links to specific documents that she mentioned, as well as some actual video of some of the sessions that happened during the World Summit and so forth. So look out for that. If you haven't reviewed the first module, look at the complementary resources where we add more information regarding the involvement of the multi-stakeholder model from the beginning. So now Naela is going to give us a concrete example, as Glenn mentioned. And Naela, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Marita. This was really awesome. I really enjoyed the presentation you gave and the history. So hi, everyone. And thank you, Alfredo and Glenn, for giving me this opportunity to speak to this group of the Internet Governance, Virtual School of Internet Governance. This is extremely important. As Rita said, we need more voices, more people involved. This is at the heart of, for this model to work, the multi-stakeholder model, as well as for the experiment that I'm going to be working on here or talking about, which is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN. I am the VP of Global Stakeholder Engagement for the North America region, as Glenn said at the beginning. I've been in the role since the beginning of November. However, as also he said in the chat, I've been part of ICANN for 15 years. And specifically, I was focused on the Ayana functions. So all that talk that Marita gave about the transition of the stewardship from the US government to the multi-stakeholder model, that was near and dear to my heart and my team's heart in the 2014 to 2016 era, and I'll go a little bit into that when we get to it. But let me talk a little bit about ICANN as the broader internet ecosystem that falls under the multi-stakeholder model. Could you please switch me to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so as Marita said, there is no one centralized place where the internet is run from, right? It's a network of networks, as was explained in the earlier slide. But in order for this to work, in order for this to be a stable, secure, and a unified global internet, there needs to be some coordination between the partners, and we'll talk a little bit in these slides about who the partners are, to help the internet work. So when you are trying to send an email to somebody, you want to make sure that the devices that are used to send the email from one person to the next, that it is securely and safely, and that you know for a fact that you're sending the email from person A to person X to person B. And so the unique address or the unique email actually gets to the right place. And that's at the heart of what happens inside the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. It's the coordination for three unique elements: the protocol parameters, the names or the domain names area, and then the numbers, which is the number resources. And we'll talk about these three pieces also shortly. Go to the next slide, please. So in order to do this, there are many partners, a wide range of partners that the ICANN model works with. in order to keep this internet operable and coherent. And so it's a loose, decentralized and distributed collection of organizations and people that help set rules, the standards, policies, and they also provide the technical support that enables the internet to work. So in this chart here, for example, we have several gears and things turning to make this work. But if we focus a little bit, you'll see, there's one circle that says the ICANN, or the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And these technical partners that we work with are diverse. So we have one group is called the Regional Internet Registries. This is the group of people that work with distributing IP addresses or Internet Protocol addresses to the rest of the world. So examples of those are here, the American Registry for Internet Numbers, or ARIN, or the RIPE NCC is another example. There's also other examples here to set. Remember, I said it's also for setting standards. So we have the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO. We also have the Internet Engineering Task Force, or IETF. So I'm not trying to say here what each one of these groups does, but I think this slide is to convey that there's many organizations that work together to make this work. Some handle the distribution of internet of IP addresses. Some handle the development of standards that we all have to use in order to talk the same language when we're working together. Some deal with governance issues, etc. So that's what this slide is trying to get at. For ICANN, in terms of as we carry on this work with our partners, ICANN has to stay focused on the mission as it relates to these unique identifiers, which is the coordination of the domain name system, the Internet Protocol addresses, and the protocol parameters, in order to help facilitate the global internet. Each of these organizations that I talked about work within their own mandate or community to set the standards, rules, and policies. So the ARIN, or the American Registry for Internet Numbers, they have their own policy-making mechanisms and their own communities that they work with. ICANN does not set policy numbers, for example, for the North America region. That's what ARIN does, and so on. Another term that you will probably hear or have heard about in this context is the ISTAR organizations. So the ISTAR, this is a group of organizations. This is a loose term to describe organizations that share responsibility for coordinating the internet technical infrastructure. ICANN, as one of those organizations, collaborates with these organizations to help to coordinate the global internet ecosystem. They include many partners that I'm sure we've mentioned earlier and you've heard of. So you've got ICANN itself. We have the Internet Society, or ISOC. We've got the Internet Engineering Task Force, or IETF. We have the Internet Architecture Board, IAB. We have the Regional Internet Registries. There's 5 of them for each region of the world. We've got the regional TLD organizations. Those are the ones that are regional organizations that work on top-level domain issues. So AFTLD is one, APTLD is one, and Center for the European TLDs is another, and so on. And then finally, we have the Internet Governance Forum, which was mentioned in Marita's slides earlier. So next slide, please. Okay, now, in addition to the last couple of slides have been focused highly on the technical partners that we work with. There are also several and very important other partners that ICANN works with that are not of non-technical nature. They all, however, in different ways, work to support the internet, the technical and the non-technical partners. When ICANN works with them, it's on policy development, it's on engagement, making sure everyone is involved, it's on security and stability issues, as they relate to the ICANN mission, of course. You'll see some of the circles here are talking about the same organizations that Marita mentioned. So we've got the Internet Governance Forum here. We have some of the UN agencies specifically listed, the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development, Internet Society, of course, and so on. So several partners that are also here at play, helping develop policies and accountability for how the internet operates. Okay, so now we're going to switch a little bit to the next slide, please. And here we're going to talk about this ICANN model, its mission, values, and role. So simply put, ICANN's mission centers around the unique system of names and numbers. I said a little bit earlier, for us to be able to communicate, we need to make sure that we're sending things to the right entity, to the right person, knowing that it will actually be delivered to them. So at the heart of this is that we've got anything that's connected to the internet, whether it's our mobile phones, our computers, our refrigerators, whatever, they all need to have their own unique IP address so that they can talk to each other and deliver the right message. These addresses work, as you know, very much like postal addresses. They allow the messages or the packet of information to be delivered from point A to point B, knowing that it's a unique address, right? So you can only send it to one place. And because addresses, historically, we know addresses are difficult to remember, the domain name system exists as a translation mechanism, so that instead of having to remember the unique IP address for Google.com, you can just go to Google.com, and so on. So none of us have to remember the IP addresses, even though we know that there are unique IP addresses that are behind the scenes for each of the unique places that we're trying to go to on the internet. We can simply just type in the name that we're trying to go to, because that's what the DNS system takes care of. It's that translation portion. Okay, so ICANN's mission as it relates to those unique set of tasks is to enable a stable and a secure operation of the Internet's unique identifier system. So specifically, what does ICANN do? It coordinates the allocation and assignment of names in the root zone for the domain name system. And those names relate only to top-level domains. Top-level domains are, example is .com, for example. It's the last string before the last dot. So .com, .info, .org, those are what we call the generic top-level domains. There's also country code top-level domains. Those are allocated to countries. For example, .us for the United States, .mx for Mexico, .br for Brazil, and so on. ICANN also coordinates the development and implementation of policies concerning the registration of second-level domains in the GTLDs, or in the generic top-level domains. So this is important. ICANN only works in coordination of registrations in the second level for generic top-level domains only. And that's a contractual relationship between ICANN and the operator of that domain. Country codes are not governed by a relationship between ICANN and that country, because country codes are operated locally. So Brazil might have its own registration rules and its own dispute mechanisms, etc., for how they deal with .br top-level domains. .ps for Palestine could be completely different mechanism. So each country works locally on what works for their own country, for their own community, for their own laws and regulations. Thirdly, ICANN facilitates the coordination and operation and evolution of the DNS root name server system. So this is the DNS root server system, is the collection of root servers that serve the contents of what Ayana produces as the root zone This is the root server system is operated by 13 different root servers, and they each have many instances. And ICANN happens to operate one of those one of those root servers. It's called the root, or the ICANN managed root server, and I'll touch on that shortly again. And then ICANN also coordinates the allocation and assignment of the top level protocol parameter. IP addresses. So ICANN holds the set of IP addresses that can be allocated to the regional internet registries, and there are policies that determine how much of that space to allocate, and it's based on the usage and the consumption use of those regional internet registries. And then finally, we also have here the collaboration with other bodies and appropriate to provide registries needed for the functioning of the specific protocol parameter system. This is the work with the standards organizations. The ITF is one of very important one here, for example, for creating registries to implement the standards and the protocols that they develop. Okay, so next slide, please. So that's on the ICANN mission, what ICANN does in the big picture. In performing its mission, what's really important is that ICANN acts in a manner that complies and reflects ICANN's commitments and respect for the core values. And those are to continue to observe and enhance the stability, security, resiliency, and openness of the internet, to have open, transparent, and bottom-up multi-stakeholder processes. Again, I can't emphasize more how important what Marita's slides were getting at, is that this is really important. It's very important for us to get it correctly and for all of us to be involved. And then as an organization, ICANN must be committed and demonstrate that it's operating with efficiency and excellence in terms of fiscal responsibility and accountability towards the community. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit here about in terms of some of what ICANN does and zero in on the, I don't know how visible this is, the 3 red squares in the lower right corner, because we talked a little bit earlier about the Ayana transition piece. So in the ICANN organization, what happened in 2016 is that the U.S. government, in fact, this happened several years earlier, and I think it was an announcement was made in 2013, is that traditionally, from the beginning of the creation of ICANN in 1998, which resulted because of the expansion of the internet and the realization that this resource needs a home and needs to be run in the benefit of everyone. And so that's when ICANN was created in 1998, and the intention was always for the stewardship or the role of the U.S. government to be transitioned to a different model. And so it took a while from 1998 to 2013, I believe, is when the announcement was made by the U.S. government. And the announcement was, we are ready to give up this role. And again, because as Marita said, the political and the geopolitical atmosphere at that time was leading up to, it's time for this governance model to be more inclusive. And so the announcement was made that the U.S. government was ready to transition the stewardship that it has of the Ayana functions, but that it also needed to see that there's a model that was set and ready to take over that role. And so there was a process for at least 2 years where the multi-stakeholder model came together and defined those new mechanisms to govern and to provide oversight for how those functions are going to work. And that's when a lot of the committees that were created to provide that, performance monitoring of the Ayana functions and seeing that there's reporting that happens on that on their performance. and involvement from the community in seeing that it actually is fulfilling its mission, etc. So that's why those three squares are labeled a little differently, or outlined a little differently, because they fall into what's called the IANA functions. And that is the part where the community, the numbers community, the numbering community, which is responsible for the Internet Protocol addresses, they contract with ICANN, and then ICANN tasks the IANA functions with performing that contract to provide the Internet Protocol numbers to those communities according to the contractual obligations that ICANN and the regional Internet registries have entered to fulfill that mission. The same thing goes for the protocol parameters. That's the work with the standards organization, with the IETF, for IANA functions to fulfill the job of creating the registries, maintaining the registries, accepting registrations into those registries, and that's also governed by a contract between ICANN and the IETF. The same thing applies to the domain name system. Domain name system, IANN has been tasked with creating with implementing the work to implement new top-level domains in the root zone, and to do the work to make changes to those top-level domains as instructed by the top-level domain operators. And the changes can include both the technical changes, meaning that they will actually happen in the root server system, and also administrative changes, meaning who's responsible for operating the domain and publishing correct contact information for them, and so on. So that's what falls under the IANA function. Of course, there's other things that the rest of the organization does, such as coordinating the domain name system, the policy development process. It's a big part of what happens through the ICANN ecosystem. Yeah, thank you. I'm going back to the rest of the squares, just making sure I cover them. The next one is called the ICANN Managed Root Server, the IMRS. I alluded to this earlier. The root server system is the system that serves the root zone data. It is served by 13 root server operators, and each of those 13 has many instances around the world. They all total to a little bit over 1,000 of them. And ICANN happens to manage one of those 13. This, of course, managing an ICANN root server system has a responsibility towards making sure that having many instances allows more people to access the internet faster, reduces latency, and helps with the stability of the DNS. There's also a big responsibility moving on to the fourth square now, to support and grow the community. Again, to make sure that that multi-stakeholder model works, it needs as much participation as possible from the entire community. Finally, just quickly, I'll touch here. There's the generic top-level domains and the country code top-level domains, just to draw the distinction. Generic top-level domains, the policies for how those domains are introduced, more of them introduced, and how they're operated happens within the ICANN ecosystem, whereas on country code top-level domains, there is an organization that looks after that in terms of global policy, but how each country code is operated inside the country, that happens at the local level. Okay, so now let's go into the next slide, please. Okay, so I talked about a number of things. So now let's go into what ICANN is as an organization, and how the ecosystem, how the multi-stakeholder ecosystem exists within ICANN. So in order for this the multi-stakeholder system inside ICANN, or the ecosystem, consists of, you can think of it as a three-legged stool. So there's three very important pillars that support the ICANN ecosystem. We have the ICANN community, the ICANN organization itself. This is where the staff work, like myself, and then the ICANN ICANN board. So at the heart of this is a decentralized governance system model that places exactly what Marita was talking about earlier: individuals, industry, non-commercial interests, and government, all on an equal footing, if you want, or an equal level. So unlike how more traditional organizations are governed, this which is a top-down governance model, these where governments are making policy decisions, the multi-stakeholder model relies on, or the approach, it must be follow a community-based, consensus-driven, and the policy-making model. The idea is that the internet, which is decentralized and includes everyone, really should mimic what it looks like, right? It's a network of networks. Everyone is involved, so the governance of it should try to mimic what the idea of the internet is. So let's start with the first pillar of the internet ecosystem, and that's our community. So the community here in ICANN is simply a volunteer-based open collection of global stakeholders. I will stress this is volunteer-based. None of the people that are making this work happen are paid people. They include businesses, internet engineers, technical experts, civil society, government, end users, and so many others. Part of the community develops policies and actions of the ICANN organization, while others include governments, for example, that provide necessary advice that must feed into the ICANN model. There are three what's known as the supporting organizations in the ICANN community. They represent IP addresses, generic top-level domains, and country code top-level domains. So the supporting organization, by the nature of their role, is to develop policy recommendations for their respective areas. There's also 4 advisory committees that give advice and recommendations. These are comprised of representatives of governments and international treaty organizations. There's also representatives of root server operators, internet society, experts, and internet end users. So the community works together through a bottom-up process to provide advice, make policy recommendations, conduct reviews. That's important because that's in the bylaws of ICANN, and propose implementation solutions for common problems within the ICANN mission and scope. So then the ICANN organization, the role of the ICANN organization is to support the community and work with the community to help them develop their policies and their recommendations. This work usually happens through physical ICANN meetings, which I will go into later, because ICANN has physical ICANN meetings when the opportunity allows, or just in ICANN meetings in general. There's many conference calls that happen, mailing lists that discuss lots of issues, and then lots of emails that go back and forth. So that's a typical work mode of the community. Next, we've got a slide, I believe, on the board. Yeah. So the board members are representatives from the community that are selected by their peers, and each of those organizations I talked about earlier, the supporting organizations and the advisory committees, they each have a role in appointing people on the board. The board has 16 members and 4 non-voting liaisons from different geographies with expertise in relevant to ICANN's mission. So the board, as a governing board, provides strategic oversight for the ICANN organization. It ensures that the organization acts within its mission and operates effectively, efficiently, and most importantly, ethically, and considers community development policy recommendations. According to the ICANN bylaws, the ICANN board approves community policy and directs the organization to implement that policy. And the way they do that is they work by resolution. They take resolutions on their work items, and the information and the backup data for those decisions is provided, is posted on the ICANN website for transparency and openness. And then finally, I believe the third of those pillars is ICANN, the organization. So the next slide, please. So here we have the slide on the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers as an organization itself. This is a not-for-profit public benefit corporation, again, with participation from all over the world. The organization itself is led by the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, and the staff. I believe they're somewhere in the 350 range around these days, but I'm not really exactly sure, but about around that number. They come from different places. I think we have at least 40 countries represented on staff and many different languages. The organization itself works on several aspects. Policy development support, of course, because working with the different supporting organizations and advisory committees. There is event management, there's registrars and registries support, community support, contractual compliance, the Ayana functions itself, outreach and capacity building, etc. So these are the different functions that the ICANN organization works on. Of course, the ICANN organization is committed to accountable, transparent, inclusive, and open operations, and that's reflected in the many reporting cycles that ICANN organization does to the community. So that concludes those the three-legged stool. So now, how does the multi-stakeholder model work in that ecosystem? So the heart of the ICANN's policymaking is called what we have been talking about, which is the multi-stakeholder model. And again, this is to reflect that the multi-stakeholder model, or the ICANN organization, reflects what the internet looks like. So the next slide, please. I said we have 3 supporting organizations and 4 advisory committees. The supporting organizations are if we can switch to the next slide, but in the interest of time, I can go ahead and switch. The supporting organizations are can you please just switch to the next slide? Thank you. Are the address supporting organizations. So this is the organization that deals with policies around allocating IP addresses. We've got the country code name supporting organization. They deal with issues around governance of country code top-level domains. And then the generic name supporting organization that deals with GTLDs. And the generics are divided into 2 sections. We've got the contracted parties, so this is the registries and registrars, and then also a non-contracted party house within the GNSO. So these are people that are not directly contracted with ICANN, but still extremely important to the ecosystem, such as the internet service providers, for example. Next slide, please. The second group is the advisory committees, and those are represent we have the at-large advisory committee. This is the end use. This is the group that represents the end users of the internet. I think Marita alluded to this, is that within the ICANN model, end users are also involved in the governance and in the ecosystem of ICANN. So that's the ALAC, the at-large community, and the ALAC advisory committee. Then we have GAC, which is the Governmental Advisory Committee, provides advice and policy on public policy issues. We have RSAC, the Root Server System Advisory Committee, which provides advice on the root server system itself. And this SSAC, which is the Stability Security Advisory Committee. They take up more security and stability issues and provide advice to ICANN on issues relating to that. How do these entities all work to create policy is a very complex process, but it involves a lot of steps. usually centered around identifying that there is an issue that needs to be worked on. So there's usually an issue report that's created, and from there it works its way through the policy development process. The policy development process includes many steps where there is several. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. So an issue is identified. A working group is established. They start working on the issue, discussing it, and so the working group, while it's an inclusive process and many people are invited to be on the working group, I mean, it can only be a certain size, right? You can't have hundreds of people on a working group. So there are many stops during the policy development process where that working group publishes its work through a policy public comment process to gather more input on how they're doing. So they publish where they're at, and then they gather more input from the community. And that's the iterative process of the community led development, policy development process. So then eventually when that policy is done in terms of development, it's wrapped up, it's sent to the ICANN board for review. If the ICANN board, when it ratifies it, it sends it to the ICANN staff for implementation, which is where the organization and staff like myself are involved. Go to the next slide, please. Sorry, I realize we're running a little bit out of time. So what is an example of we wanted to include here an example of a policy development process that I think many people on this in this forum are probably familiar with, is the new GTLD program. This is one of the large policy development efforts that took several years to develop and then implement. And so what's at the heart of this, the program is to foster competition, innovation, and increase user choice for domain name industry. So I'll tell you that up until about 2011, 2012, especially in the Ayana function, we used to get lots of emails that would say, hey, I would like to create my own top-level domain. How do I go about that? And then the answer was simply, we don't have a mechanism to tell you how to create a new top-level domain because there was no policy for us to point to. So until the policy existed, there was no mechanism to create that. And so that's what that new GTLD program tried to change. You can go to the next slide, please. And the idea was, again, for it to foster innovation. And then also what was really important is to create, up until then, all the TLDs that we had in the generic side for generic top-level domains were all ASCII-based TLDs. So they were all represented in ASCII letters. So we didn't have any internationalized top-level domains. And so one of the important requirements of the new generic top-level domain program was to create ability for additional top-level domains using characters other than English, Latin script that supported English and all the other Latin-based languages. I want to show you, so that's the program that ran from about 2012 to as of around 2017. If you go to the next slide, there were around 1,227 TLDs, new TLDs that were introduced to the root zone. And this map shows you geographically where those new top-level domains came from. And this really kind of revolutionized the looks of the root zone, because up until this happened, the root zone was around 250 top-level domains, roughly 250, I will say, that represented countries, and then around 20 or so that represented generic top-level domains. And so through the ICANN, through the new generic top-level domain program, this completely changed to now we're looking at about 1,500 or 1,500 top-level domains in the root zone. Okay, quickly, I will go breeze through these slides, but please look up more information. Is how to get involved. Again, to emphasize that in order for this to be successful, we need everyone to participate. There are three ICANN meetings that take place every year. They move throughout the regions. So please check out the ICANN website for more information about what the meetings are happening. There are different other platforms that you can use to learn more about this and participate. I'll highlight the third square here, which is learn.icann.org. Many topics are explained there if you need more information. I believe that's referenced also from your platform here, your virtual platform. Please attend any regional events that you know of in your region. We as in my team, our job is to make sure that our regions are informed of events that are happening so that you can participate. And then there are 5 ICANN newsletters that go out monthly to the different regions. So please join those and subscribe if you're not already. Next slide, please. We have also 3 different programs that are targeted at increasing participation into the ICANN model. We've got the fellowship, the next gen, and the newcomer. The fellowship is looking for ways to increase capacity building and participation into the ICANN model. The next gen or the next generation is a little bit different. It's more regionally based, and it's looking at a specific age group to increase awareness and promote future discussions into the ICANN model. And then the newcomer program looks at bringing newcomers into the ICANN system. It's more of a self-education model, and there's one day dedicated to the newcomers during the ICANN meeting. So please contact me or look at the links provided on the slides if you have any questions about any of those 3 programs. Next slide, please. In this slide, we just explain the difference between the fellowship program and the next gen program. If you have any questions, please contact me. What's important here is that there's to remember that the next gen is regionally based, and it looks at groups of ages between 18 and 30. And so there's a little bit of restriction there on the age of who can apply for that program. Next slide, please. I think we talk about the funding of those programs, the fellowship and next gen fund traveling to ICANN meetings when they happen in person. The newcomer program does not, but there are several resources dedicated to newcomers. So please look up that information if you are interested in participating or joining ICANN through one of these 3 programs. And I believe that's the end of my presentation, right? Alfredo, are there any other slides? I think that's it. Okay, I'm going to write my email address here because I feel like I breezed through the last few things. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I'll open the questions now.
This is Alfredo, and I just want to express my appreciation to Naela and Marita for the excellent presentations. And as you can see, we could have spent easily 2 hours among the 2 ladies that presented today. There are some questions, and I'll let Glenn speak on behalf of that for a couple of minutes. We have 2 minutes left. Glenn, go ahead. I can't hear you, Glenn. So while Glenn works on the audio, I do have a question for you, Marita, and you more or less answered it at the beginning. I was wondering what would be the ideal multi-stakeholder model based on your experience. And I know Glenn mentioned that it depends on the remit or mission of that organization, but shouldn't all organizations have something similar? What are your ideas on that, Marita?
Okay, I'm muted. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. Thanks for the question. Yeah, as I indicated in the chat, I don't think there's such a thing as an ideal model. I think what's really important was that slide I showed about the characteristics that have to be there in whatever model happens, whatever model that is being worked on, because it all depends on the remit of that particular organization or group. And it has to be real. People really have to be participating. It's not an illusion, not just sort of a pat on the head and say, okay, thank you for your opinion. Now we're going to go ahead and make a decision. It's got to be real. It's got to have those characteristics, got to be participatory and accessible and diverse. So, you know, that's how I would answer that question. I don't think there's an ideal model out there, and we've got a hell of a lot to learn. But we're moving forward in understanding how this model can be used, and I think it can be used in many ways. But as I said, I think the internet is kind of an incubator here, and in future generations, we'll see whether or not it ended up becoming something important in the way we govern the world and our lives and our organizations.
Thank you, Marita, for that response. I invite all of the participants, all our students, to visit the first module, the history of Internet governance, and this module, the actors in the Internet governance ecosystem, because we touch on basically all the topics in more or less details that Naela and Marita mentioned. I would also invite you to respond to the short survey that is in the chat, and you'll find it in each one of the modules in the live session section as well. We're 1 minute over time, so thank you everybody for participating in this very invigorating and interesting discussion. We'll see you next week. So good day.